bigger ones for me was, the club taking on the Johnson's Park project in that neighborhood and working with Brown Street Academy. I think that anytime that we've talked about going into that neighborhood and doing work but not doing it, to somebody, doing it with them and their thoughts in mind and what's happening there, and trying to continue that work and bring other people and make it more inclusive to how do we, revitalize a neighborhood in Milwaukee. So, the ability to constantly be, like I referenced before, be able to pivot and change. So, I think that I'm very proud of the work that Rotary's done in this time of COVID. Right away, obviously membership was a challenge and an issue in looking at that, but simultaneously saying, where there's a challenge, there's opportunity. We're not meeting in person. We're actually saving some dollars by not paying for meals. Can we actually go and give some of that money back to the community? We might have done more, service project being physically service oriented. We've been able to make that shift. I think we've been able to make a good case that, there's still a value proposition to be had. The reality is, right, if you have put in the time and relationship to the deposits beforehand, it's been a whole lot easier to reach out to people now to say, I need that one-off conversation with you about this thing, or a cluster of us to get together in smaller groups or find an outdoor space or something where we can still either move our work forward or, just meet individually to get things done. So I appreciate the ability to do that.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I am Club President Darren Miller, President and owner of JM Construction. As we gather virtually together today, we will begin the program with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now it's with a heavy heart that I want to take a moment of silence to honor the memory of Paul Meyer, who died peacefully in his home of 58 years on January 21st. A lifelong resident of Wisconsin, Paul grew up in Shorewood and on Oconomowoc Lake. He worked for and later became president of the Motor Transport Company. He was also a board member of the Wisconsin Marine Bank. He was devoted to his family and his faith and loved skiing, sailing, tennis, and traveling. He believed that memories would last forever. A Rotarian who was honored for 50 years of perfect attendance. Simply amazing. He gave his time and resources to many charities. For decades, he was a regular blood donor and rang the bells for the Salvation Army at Christmas. Please join me today in a moment of silence. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Mark Stoddard, President of Central Legislative Technologies, to give our invocation. Mark.
Mark, you're muted.
How's that? Thanks, President Darren. With our speakers today being practitioners of what can be called accountability journalism, this seems an appropriate moment to contemplate the great power of truth and transparency on our government and our communities. The events of the last few weeks and months and more have taught us quite a few painful lessons about the corrosive power of falsehoods and disinformation and the engines that promote them. The quotation we often think of in times like these is that one from the great Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who nicely used the sunlight metaphor when he noted back in 1913, "Publicity is justly commended as a remedy for social and industrial diseases. Sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants, electric light the most efficient policeman." We give thanks today to our speakers and the team at the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism for their work to promote truth and to bring sunlight where it's needed most. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mark. I'd like to also say thank you to Wendell Willis, who is featured in our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series that played prior to the start of the program. It's always heartening for us to hear from our members that they value Rotary more now than ever. And now I'd like to welcome Jennifer Savanich, CEO of Progressive Community Health Center, who will introduce our newest member, Scott Howig.
Thank you, President Darren. It is truly my pleasure to introduce you all to Scott Howig. He is Executive Vice President, Chief Financial and Administrative Officer, and Treasurer at Froedtert Health. He oversees all strategic and operational matters related to finance and administration for the health system. And this includes financial planning and budgeting, financial reporting, decision support, revenue cycle management, managed care contracting, insurance products and risk, supply chain operations, facilities planning, and plant operations and information technology. So that is a handful, to say the least. Scott was born in West Bend and received his undergraduate degree in accounting and finance with a minor in economics from UW-Whitewater, where he played football. He later earned his MBA from Duke University. In his career, Scott has experiences ranging from being the 11th employee of a startup healthcare company, Accordant Health Services, to working at Arthur Andersen until that Enron thing. He landed at Deloitte, then started his academic health system career with finance leadership roles at Duke University Health System and the University of Florida Shands, and then back to Duke until coming home to be at Froedtert. Scott enjoys being engaged with the greater community, and he currently serves on the United Community Center Board and Finance Committee, as well as the Marquette University Finance Department Advisory Board. Scott and his wife, Rachel, who's also from West Bend, now live in Whitefish Bay. They have 2 children, Jacob and Grace, who are both now attending UW-Madison. So welcome, Scott, to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. And it's very nice to virtually meet you all. Look forward to hopefully doing this live very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. You may have noticed that our links to our Tuesday and Thursday programming have changed this month. You no longer need to find the most recent email link to our live programs. You can now simply bookmark the Tuesday and Thursday programming access pages that are in our weekly emails to your web browser in order to access the program each week. The pages will be updated weekly with current program information. Contact Michelle in the Rotary office if you have any questions. Last Thursday's snack program featured Rotarian Meg McKenna. She spoke about Visit Milwaukee's newest initiative, Giving Fest, a series of virtual events taking place in January and February to support the local hospitality community that has been deeply affected by the pandemic. If you missed the program, check out the link in the email that went out this morning so that you can explore how you might support the hospitality community. This Thursday at noon, Rotarian Angie Tornes, Wisconsin Field Office Manager of the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, will share a bit about the program and projects in which NPS has been involved in the Milwaukee, Southeast Wisconsin area. Be sure to check that out. And for those missing connections to fellow Rotarians, the leaner snack format makes it possible to feel connected with others on the call. We find that the programs are the highlight of the week. Join us at 11:30 for informal connecting with Rotarians prior to the program starting at noon. And speaking of connections, past President Steve Chevalier is with us today, who will tell us a bit more about another opportunity to connect with fellow Rotarians. Steve?
Well, thank you, Darren, and hello, fellow Rotarians. I don't know about you, but I'm really, really sick of this pandemic and looking forward to normal, whatever normal turns out to be. And it's amazing to me the things that I used to take for granted that I don't anymore, like attending our weekly Rotary lunch meetings, obviously, going to see a movie at the Majestic Cinema, playing with my grandchildren without a mask on and without being concerned, bowling with my friends, shopping. Yeah, even shopping with my wife, which looks great right now. But there have been many blessings that have occurred. For example, I have a much shorter commute to my office. It's 1 flight of stairs instead of 16 miles in the car. And going to work with, my jeans and my flannel shirts, taking more walks with my wife, and more time to read good books. Did I say books? Yeah. We are reading a book right now, which is really awesome. It's Rotary has filled the gap with a club reading circle. And our latest adventure is a book called Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. Isabel Wilkerson is an award-winning New York Times journalist. It's a fascinating analysis of the concepts of racism, the history of it in our country. And she compares it to Nazi Germany and the Aryan movement and the caste system in India. And the parallels are amazing for those three systems. And what we call racism is really, in her opinion, a caste system. She wowed me with her description of how we got to this point in our country, and even more poignantly with a lot of human interest stories that she has referenced and told about in her book, which really brings the book alive. It helps us understand events here and in India and in Germany and kind of compares them. It's helped me understand my views and what has shaped my views with our institutional history here in the United States. And hopefully it'll help me change and improve, and how I have to stand up and actually say something for others. So we're going to meet 5 more times, starting tomorrow afternoon on Zoom. We'll meet twice in February and twice in March. It's moderated by our great fellow member, Paula Pennebaker. It's fun, it's informative. It's a chance to see and talk with your fellow Rotarians instead of always in business meetings. It's a guilt-free, friendly environment. The sessions are broken down by chapters, so it is not too late. There's plenty of time to get in and participate. As I said, we've got 5 more meetings starting tomorrow. It's broken down into nice chunks. And if you'd like to have some fun and a very good read, please contact Michelle at the office. She'll get you the exact dates and times and get you hooked up for the Zoom connection. I look forward to seeing more of you there. We've got a good group now, but we always have room for more.
Thanks for coming on, Steve, to make that announcement. As they say, yeah, you can't forget the history that you never learned. So these are great opportunities to connect. A few more moments of club business before our program begins. Yet one more way to connect. We have heard across the organization that our members are missing the small interactions and new connections that are formed at in-person events. While we cannot wait to get back together in meeting in person, in the interim, we are introducing pairing connections. Sign up each month to be randomly paired with another Rotary member. It will then be up to the individuals to schedule a virtual or socially distanced meetup or meetups throughout that month. New matches are now being put together for February, so you can connect with a different member each month. Get to know someone new or reconnect with an existing friend. Participation is optional, but strongly encouraged to continue growing valuable relationships within our organization. Sign up by clicking the link in this morning's email, or of course, reach out to Michelle in the Rotary office. Finally, be sure to check out this week's People of Action feature. This week's profile is featuring Rotary past president Ed Kershaw, and this was written by Kimberly Kane, president and CEO of Kane Communications. We now have a team of 6 writing these bi-monthly features. Be sure to check them out on our Friday emails or go to our website to read a treasure trove of past profiles. And thank you to all of our members who are writing them. And now I turn to James Burnett, Director of Strategic Public Relations at Kane Communications Group, to introduce our program. James?
Thank you, President Darren. As you've heard, today's program will feature the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. In his novel, Little B, British author Chris Cleave described investigative journalism as exposing corruption and brandishing truth. I don't think he was far off. May have been an oversimplification, but not by much. And I have to say, as a former reporter, editor, and a newspaper columnist, I am biased, admittedly biased, that we couldn't have a better slate of speakers today. So today's presentation will be led by the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism's Executive Director, Andy Hall, Managing Editor, D.J. Hall, and Development Director, Jay Burseth. Again, Andy Hall is Executive Director and co-founder of the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism since the center's launch in 2009. He's won dozens of awards for his reporting over 26 years at the Wisconsin State Journal and the Arizona Republic. Hall has served as a mentor to the staff of La Comunidad, a Spanish language newspaper in Madison. and has taught numerous courses at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication. He serves on the Institute for Nonprofit News Membership Task Force and on the Wisconsin Freedom of Information Council, Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism Board of Directors, and Indiana University Media School's Journalism Alumni Board, of which he is a past president. That was a mouthful. He earned a bachelor's degree from Indiana University and in 2016 received a Distinguished Alumni Award from the IU Media School. D.J. Hall is co-founder of the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism and became managing editor in 2015, leading the center's daily news operations. She too worked at the Wisconsin State Journal for 24 years as an editor and reporter focusing on projects and investigations. A graduate of Indiana University's journalism school, Hall was a reporter for 8 years at the Arizona Republic, where she covered city government, schools, and the environment before moving back to her hometown of Madison. During her 35-year journalism career, Hall has won more than 36 local, state, and national awards for her work. And finally, last but not least, Jay Burseth joined the center in April 2020 as the organization's first development director. Prior to joining the center, he led fundraising for the Milwaukee County Parks and, sorry, lost my script for a moment, for the Milwaukee County Parks and was the development director for the Milwaukee-based public radio station WMSE 91.7. Burseth holds a master's in nonprofit management and leadership from UW-Milwaukee, where he focused on fundraising and marketing in public media, as well as a bachelor's degree in political science and history, also from UWM. Andy, Dee, and Jay, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
James.
thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I will share my screen. So good afternoon, and thank you again for that introduction, James. Like you said, I am Jay Burseth. I am the development director for the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, and also joined by executive director Andy Hall and managing editor D.J. Hall. So what we'd like to do today is give you an understanding of what the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism does, the state of journalism today and the role of journalism to strengthen democracy, and how disinformation has spread within the past decade and what we can do to combat disinformation and spread trusted news. It is our hope that we can provide some important resources and insight for all of us to use as news consumers, and we look forward to your questions at the end.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real honor to speak with you today. We really appreciate the opportunity. So Dee and I started the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. Much of it actually was planned right here from the basement bar at our home just south of Madison, where I'm speaking to you from this morning. Dee's upstairs on the first floor, and I'm allowed to venture upstairs for meal times. We officially launched the center in 2009, so we're now beginning the 13th year of operations. And through our newsroom, which is known as Wisconsin Watch, our brand of nonpartisan, nonprofit news has been used as a framework by other news organizations that want to create a sustainable philanthropic revenue model that does not rely on subscription fees or paywalls or advertising revenue. We've grown from an organization that existed from the generosity of a handful of foundations to one that now manages a budget of over $1 million a year. It's run by a professional staff. It trains the next generation of investigative journalists and news entrepreneurs who will figure out how to support the industry in the future. It has hundreds of supporters, including the over 100 generous major donors who make up our Watchdog Club and Leadership Circle. Our mission is to increase the quality, quantity, and understanding of investigative journalism to inform the citizenry and strengthen democracy. Words that we wrote a long time ago out of a sort of a civic recognition of the importance of journalism to a democracy, but one which we now feel on a much more visceral level than when we set out on this journey. We shape the work that we do and what to investigate based on our guiding principles, which Dee and I developed a long time ago. The first is protect the vulnerable, expose wrongdoing, and explore solutions. We look for broken and failing systems, and we put those findings into a state, regional, and national context. When we created the mission and the principles, it was in the midst of a crisis, the Great Recession. Those principles and the mission continue to guide us today through our current crises. And now more than ever, we need fact-checked investigative reporting as a critical sector to strengthen our democracy. And I would also note that as an organization, we are committed to anti-racism and a pledge of action that was signed by our entire staff. And among other things, we pledge to investigate and expose the disparate impacts of systems on people of color and seek solutions that will help erase those disparities from our society.
And in addition to all that, training the next generation of journalists is a critical part of our mission. We are working from our homes now, but when we are working in our offices, we're located at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at UW-Madison. We hire paid student interns from UW and elsewhere, and serve as a resource for students and faculty alike. By training young journalists, we give students the opportunity to have their work published and the experience to launch their careers in investigative journalism. And pictured here on this slide is Alexandra Arriaga, who was with us in 2016 and is now a reporter at the City Bureau in Chicago, and Will Chochi, who is our current multimedia journalism intern.
So we'd like to just take a little trip backwards in time. Most of you are, well, I think probably all of you are old enough to remember some of these older days. When your trusty newspaper arrived at your doorstep, you probably had little reason to question whether the information in it was accurate or where it came from. But technological and economic forces, including the emergence of the internet, have drastically reduced revenue to newspapers. Stores and businesses, of course, now can reach their customers directly. Many no longer need the local newspaper to get their messages out. Many news consumers prefer to get their information on their phones, the tablets, laptops. Newsroom employment is down more than 50% just in the past decade. Ultimately, this has created an institutional weakness in the traditional news media that communities and voters had, for the most part, trusted for decades. And consequently, newsrooms are now half the size they were in 2008, and many newspapers are just gone. So why does this matter? Well, a lot of things happen when newspapers die, or even for that matter, when they retrench. Here's what researchers have found. There's lower voter turnout, fewer competitive races for office. Voters often don't even know who's running for Congress. Government waste increases when reporters and the public aren't watching. Businesses feel more free to pollute, and regulators feel free to look the other way. And so when fact-based news disappears, residents start to get information from biased sources instead of nonpartisan fact-based sources. All of that hardens the public's political positions. And the bottom line, no news is bad news for democracy. And when news coverage is strong, democracy is strengthened.
Media that report only one side of the story further erode that trust. Millions of Americans get their news exclusively from Fox News on the right or MSNBC on the left. This split makes viewers unaware of or hostile to perspectives different from the ones they see on TV. And what they see is often not reporting, but commentary. Here in Wisconsin, we have seen the emergence of news reports from outlets with ideological agendas and little or no disclosure of who funds their work. That can lead to confusion over what's fact and what's opinion. It's worth noting that under oath, journalists like Tucker Carlson have been forced to acknowledge that their news programs are really a form of entertainment, not involving actual facts, but, quote, exaggeration and non-literal commentary. Not all of us are laughing.
Well, Donald Trump is no longer president, but his frequent references to information critical of him as fake news and declaration that journalists are enemies of the people have had a negative and potentially long-lasting impact on trust in the news. Further, most people in the US now get news from social media, which is filled with legitimate news and propaganda and, frankly, a lot of garbage. Trust in the news media is at an all-time low, leading people to use unreliable information that they come across on social media. These news consumers are often actually targeted by bad actors who are spreading disinformation and conspiracy theories. As you can see from this graphic, more than half of Americans believe the news media are trying to mislead people and that they only report information that supports their political ideologies. The distrust is highest among Republicans, where less than 1 in 5 believe what they read, see, and hear from traditional news organizations.
In fact, the internet and social media have become major sources of disinformation, leading to further media distrust as explosive quote unquote stories like the stolen 2020 election are contradicted or ignored by mainstream news outlets. This process prompts consumers of actual fake news to distrust real factual news. And as we saw on January 6th, belief in these lies and propaganda can lead people to take dangerous actions.
It's hard to describe QAnon. To most people, its beliefs are just crazy and nonsensical, but millions of people believe in them. Drew Harwell of the Washington Post describes it as a, quote, sprawling set of false conspiracy theories that alleges former President Donald Trump is at war with a world-shaping cabal of child trafficking Satanists, end quote. These followers believe in something known as the storm, which is a day of reckoning involving, quote, mass executions and an extended Trump presidency, end quote. Harwell explains that some adherents believe that Trump is waging war against a deep state cabal of powerful Satanists who drink children's blood, while others believe in a less kooky version, a, quote, secret worldwide system of oppression has been built to keep Trump supporters down, end quote.
The US intelligence community found that disinformation was used by various actors for political gain in the 2016 and 2020 elections. While Russia and its so-called troll factory were blamed for much of the false information spread in 2016, Americans themselves were main drivers of false narratives in 2020. Some top Republican leaders spread debunked theories that the election was stolen from Trump. Republicans who spoke out against such disinformation were harassed, online and in person. A quick definition: disinformation is spread purposely to deceive people. Misinformation, on the other hand, is spread often unknowingly by people who receive the disinformation, and they may actually believe it.
As many of you are aware, the United States experienced a flood of misinformation and disinformation about the risks and remedies of COVID-19, ranging from quack cures, remember the advice to drink bleach, to the false idea that masks enhance rather than reduce the risk of contracting the virus, to the conspiracy theory that 5G technology causes the disease. This disinformation came from a variety of sources, ranging from President Donald Trump, who eschewed the use of masks, to natural remedy websites. stories proliferated of people who regretted their decision to buy into false information about COVID-19. After his wife, Erin, died, Brian Lee Hitchens of Florida said the couple refused to take the pandemic seriously because of information that they had seen on the internet. Quote, "We thought the government was using it to distract us," Hitchens told the BBC, or it was to do with 5G. As false claims about elections, voting, the pandemic, and vaccines spread throughout 2020, we made it a priority at Wisconsin Watch to debunk mis and disinformation in Wisconsin and to provide fact-checked, reliable reporting that can be used to inform all citizens. We partnered with First Draft News and the Center for Journalism Ethics at UW-Madison to report on election integrity and to, through a couple of toolkits, give news consumers and journalists the tools that they need to understand election misinformation and disinformation. Led by our reporter, Howard Hardy, these guides helped people understand where misinformation comes from and how to challenge the spreading of it. As we're seeing the same kind of disinformation spread around the pandemic, even today, and the election results, these guides still can be used to combat disinformation campaigns in 2021 and beyond. So we'd like to conclude by giving you some tips that will help truth be the vaccine to disinformation.
So how do you know whether the news you read, see, and hear is trustworthy? Here are some things to look for. Are the sources in the story named? If not, why not? Are a range of viewpoints represented? Are key facts in the report confirmed by other news outlets, especially trusted ones? Does the news organization, if it's a nonprofit, reveal how it gets its money so that you can assess whether its stories are truly independent of its funders? Does it promptly correct information that is wrong? Does it cover news from a nonpartisan viewpoint, or is it always from a conservative or liberal point of view? Here, for example, is a deep fake, a photo that has been altered from a woman wearing a sorority t-shirt to one wearing a pro-Trump t-shirt. Several organizations, including PolitiFact, FactCheck.org, and MediaBias/FactCheck, have aggregated lists of hundreds of these websites, but due to their sheer proliferation, the list can quickly become out of date. Many fake news sites nonetheless have common attributes that make identifying them easier. Headlines are often clickbaity. Information about the authors is scant, and the About Us pages offer little insight into who is running the website. Fake news sites sometimes take advantage of the fact that people often trust local news more and will cast themselves as local outlets, like the Denver Guardian, which really doesn't exist, even featuring local stories. For example, a social media post that impersonated the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported that Wisconsin students would have to repeat the 2019-20 school year in light of the COVID-19 related school closures. That was false. In recent years, major platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Google, and YouTube, have blocked purveyors of disinformation, including Alex Jones from InfoWars, seen here, the Parler website, and even President Trump.
We'd like to offer some words of advice on how to be a better inhabitant of the news ecosystem. We all have a role to play. First, refrain from spreading misinformation on social media. And I suspect that you know the posts and the tweets that I'm talking about. Yep, it's the ones from that relative. Don't spread their misinformation. Please do avoid living in a news bubble. It's easier to stay in a bubble today than ever, but it's important that all of us read, listen to, and watch news from diverse sources. If in doubt, check dependable sites such as Snopes or PolitiFact or FactCheck.org or the Washington Post or other fact-checking sites to see not only what the overall verdict is about that statement, but what that journalist based those conclusions upon. And you can always do it yourself. Go to Google and check it out before spreading the misinformation.
So most people don't spread falsehoods on purpose. Be civil when offering a correction, especially if it's directed at a loved one. One expert advises keeping those conversations focused on the information being discussed and avoid being drawn into emotional arguments or character attacks. Fight falsehoods with facts by providing trusted information sources to counter the disinformation. Consider whether to offer a correction with a public comment or a private message. Nobody likes feeling duped, and a call out could invoke a defensive posture. On the other hand, a public correction may do more good for the information ecosystem, and some people are beyond help. For those people, the best approach is to say, here are the resources I use. Good luck.
And finally, if you would like to be more proactive in addressing disinformation, even beyond these tips, we will continue our coverage of mis and disinformation throughout 2021, and that can help in addressing the spread of fake news, and that can be found at wisconsinwatch.org. Additionally, PEN America has a tip sheet for how to talk to friends and family who share mis and disinformation. You can find that at pen.org. And Common Cause offers volunteer training to monitor social media, flag disinformation, and assist anyone who has questions to help decipher disinformation through their website, commoncause.org. One of the best ways to counter disinformation really is to support trusted, reliable news organizations. With the decline of subscription newspapers, news media that previously relied on that revenue are now struggling to stay open. By supporting news organizations you trust, you are supporting the effort to share reliable, professional news and combat the spread of disinformation. For news like the New York Times or Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, there are digital and print subscription options for unlimited access to their reporting, and public media such as NPR, PBS, and nonprofit newsrooms. There are donation levels for each organization that vary from $5 a month to thousands a year. And thank you. Thank you again for joining us today. If you would like to follow our reporting on disinformation, as well as our in-depth coronavirus coverage, reporting on civic and environmental health, and more, you can follow us on social media with our handle, Wisconsin Watch, and read our reporting on our website, wisconsinwatch.org, where you can also sign up for our free email newsletter. And all three of our contact information is provided here if you'd like to get in touch with any of us, or if you would like us to share these slides with you or any of the guides we mentioned today, feel free to email us. And we look forward to your questions now.
Thank you, Andy, Dee, and Jay. So we're going to move now to, we're going to stop spotlighting the speakers and move to more of a gallery view, so we all have a little bit more equality here. And I'm going to read questions from the chat, though I guess we're still in the, here we go. One, and a couple of questions here. I like you, we are a nonpartisan organization, and we try very hard to be balanced. And there's some comments here that a lot of the examples of misinformation were really one-sided. Do you have examples of misinformation from the left as well as the right that you might want to share?
Well, this is Dee. There is some of that, but there's an asymmetric situation that's going on right now in the United States, and it involves more folks on the right accessing and spreading information that is not true. It definitely happens on the left. If you watch MSNBC, for example, you will see sometimes it's not so much misinformation as the spin on the same pieces of information. That's another thing to look out for, is you might agree on the facts that there were people at the Capitol on January 6th and they entered the building and and X number of people died, but you might disagree on the assessment of that. But it is somewhat asymmetrical right now. It could change, things could change, but right now it is, the reason there are more examples from the right is because it is happening more on the right at this moment in history.
And I would just quickly add to that, when we're looking at information to evaluate, like in the coverage that Howard Hardy has produced for us, we don't even think about whether that information it represents a liberal or conservative viewpoint. We're just looking at the information itself and is it accurate? Because truth is the only thing that matters, not the political orientation of the overall misinformation.
Thank you. And from Tom Sattler here, can you speak of what is the demographics of most of the consumers of fake news? Is it class-based, grievance-based?
I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I will tell you that the consumers of that information, when you look at COVID-19, that's a great example. They go from the far right of the political spectrum to the far left. You know, the anti-vax kind of space has been occupied by, you know, people who believe in natural remedies and you know, people who run these natural remedy websites, all the way to people on the far right who believe that this is a government plot to control us, you know, by having, you know, lockdowns and limiting public gatherings and making people, you know, asking people to wear masks. So in terms of the consumers of that, it really depends on the issue. You know, 5G, for example, that it somehow is this nefarious thing that's going to like fry our brains and control us. That's coming a lot from the left, people who distrust technology. So people on all parts of the spectrum are really vulnerable to this kind of message, these types of messages.
But I believe there has been research from Pew and others which indicates that conservatives have been more vulnerable to being swayed by the misinformation. It's more likely to affect their overall conclusions about whether you can trust government and other institutions, for example.
Okay, Teresa Regan asks, and I think you did reference this in your talk, but I'd like your perspective on Snopes.com for factual reviews of many internet rumors.
Sure. It's, I mean, like with everything else, evaluate it alongside the other sources that you're hearing from. I think Snopes does a good job of telling you what it's basing its conclusions upon, what sources it's using. And there have been some references to Snopes' overall performance. For example, factcheck.org, which is a nonprofit fact-checking site, took on the question of whether Snopes exhibits a political bias, and their conclusion was, you know, to use the term that they used, was that Snopes was poker-faced when it came to evaluating various claims that they evaluated from George W. Bush and Sarah Palin and Obama. So there's no one site that we should always rely upon. But in my experience, in looking at the claims that Snopes has evaluated, I still have not seen one where it appeared to me that they were basing their conclusion upon unreliable information.
That's helpful, thank you. Mark Stoddard says, can you talk about disinformation activities that you've observed locally and in Wisconsin about, for example, state or local government activities?
Well, the thing that pops into my head is a story that we did probably this summer about the Appleton City Council. It was voting on a pretty non-controversial acceptance of state funding to continue contact tracing and other activities, public health activities around COVID-19. And a rumor was spreading that somehow they were going to start, if you tested positive for COVID, you were going to, like, the city was going to have like cameras beamed at your house and all of your movements would be monitored. And it was just completely made up from whole cloth. And so they had to address that information, which was disinformation spread by who knows what, for whatever reason. But it has real world consequences when these decision makers, policymakers, have to address things that are simply not true. It's hard to prove a negative, except that, you know, we interviewed a council member who said, look, there's nothing, we're not funding anything like that. But, you know, because people can come from a place of extreme distrust, then they don't believe the denials either. So it's a real thorny problem for local governments.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Mark. Another question about Wisconsin. Are there particular regions of the state that suffer the most from the news desert problem? And he imagines that there's probably a rural versus urban difference in this question as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a profound issue. One that has not been authoritatively quantified by anybody. There is a new center housed at the School of Journalism at UW-Madison that just received some funding that's going to try to dig into that issue more authoritatively. The University of North Carolina does what's currently viewed as the best research on news deserts nationwide. They have a crude measure. It just really looks at news closures of newspapers. Doesn't really get into the equally important issue of the hollowing out of newsrooms that lead you to kind of have like ghost newspapers, ghost websites still operating without real coverage being produced to keep the public informed. But with with that as a pretext or as for some context. It's obvious that many rural areas in Wisconsin are news deserts. For one thing, they're more vulnerable to becoming a news desert because they were probably relying upon just one or two thinly staffed news organizations, probably a newspaper before the Great Recession and before all the other economic chaos that has ensued. So if they lose just one or two places, there may be then no coverage specifically produced for an entire county, for example. Anecdotally, I can tell you that there's widespread agreement that the northwest part of Wisconsin and western Wisconsin are viewed, and those are largely rural areas, are viewed as news deserts. We've had people who live in those regions write to us saying, could you please help solve this problem? We need more coverage. We don't know what our local governments are up to. But also there are socioeconomic news deserts. Those of us in journalism have traditionally failed to produce strong coverage of geographically dispersed socioeconomic groups, such as the Hmong or Native Americans. We have tens of thousands of Hmong and Native Americans in Wisconsin, geographically dispersed. We need to do a better job of covering those populations. And then I would also say those of us who live in urban and suburban areas can't relax either. There are, in fact, news deserts within our own communities. Underrepresented neighborhoods, for example, in Milwaukee. We have two very close reporting partnerships at Wisconsin Watch. One is with Wisconsin Public Radio. The other is with Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. And last year we started on a project known as News 414, in which we're trying a new approach to address those news deserts. And that is to actually figure out by asking residents, what are your most pressing needs? What are the issues that are affecting your quality of life most directly? and then we actually text them information that helps them begin to address those issues. And we also make our reporters available at NNS and Wisconsin Watch through the News 414 project to help them address those issues. And we simultaneously produce in-depth accountability journalism to then help inform the public and policymakers of those problems, and we hope become a catalyst in the search for solutions to the problems that are highlighted. So there are a lot of things that can be done, things that need to be done. There's not nearly enough money to do this stuff at scale. That's something we and many other journalism organizations are working hard at. But this is it's a growing threat actually to the fabric of our society and to our democracy.
Well, past President Steve Chevalier wants to know if he can trust Chuck Todd.
Yes, you can trust Chuck Todd.
Okay.
I do want to, can I add, I'm seeing some of these comments about
Yep.
people wondering about, why it seems is NPR, for example, and PBS, are they more biased on the left? And this is something I've never seen. You've heard my bio, so you know I've been around a while, and I have never, as a reporter, seen the situation where we are having to combat so much false information on such a consistent basis. And by being thrust into that role of literally saying, well, the president was lying to you today, or this person lied, it puts us in an oppositional, we're trying to be, people who just gather information, factual information, but we have also been thrust into the position of being like truth warriors, which makes us look like we're biased against the people who are not telling you the truth, but we're biased toward the truth. And if you get on the wrong side of that, it is going to look like we're taking sides, because we will always side with what is true and what's factual to the extent to which we can discover it. So that has created this weird dynamic where it looks like the entire press corps, except for one American news network, was opposed to the Trump administration, but what they were opposed to was disinformation and false information being spread.
Okay, any thoughts about how consolidation of the industry has helped to create this environment? And then kind of a related comment as compared to the days when the Journal and the Sentinel operated independently, exacerbated by the more recent gutting of the remnants, Milwaukee could be considered a news desert, especially in terms of any serious coverage of local government. So we really, we have seen dramatic cuts, and the consolidation has been real, and newspapers are owned by private equity firms. So, I mean, we're running out of time here, but any comments on the global view of the industry from that perspective?
Yes. Don't worry about the Washington Post and the New York Times and NPR and the Wall Street Journal. They're by and large producing robust, authoritative news coverage and for the national audience and covering national issues. But the biggest threat to democracy and to our way of life actually is local journalism, as well as regional news organizations. And I would certainly put the Journal Sentinel and the problems with Gannett, the financial problems at Gannett, the 11 Gannett properties in Wisconsin. The revenue has not been there to support the size of the staffing. So the only way to keep the profits up has been to reduce the staffing size. I certainly hope that turns around. In the meantime, all of us in journalism need to innovate. That means more collaboration. That means increasingly for-profit news organizations are turning to some of the things that have been working for nonprofits. You'll see them reaching out more and more, using the language of nonprofit journalism, talking about memberships rather than just subscriptions, and asking actually even for donations to support investigative reporting teams and special initiatives to dig into pressing issues that confront the community. New ventures are being tried all the time, and there is actually an increase in the rise of some of the small online local news outlets. Ethnic news organizations have a major role to play here. They've long done a good job and have built trust in areas of the community that have not been well served by mainstream media. We need to collaborate with those news outlets. We need to rethink the way we structure news coverage to better serve vulnerable populations, while at the same time be as innovative as we can when it comes to figuring out how to get the revenue to support that work.
I think that this probably ties up what you're saying and can be our last question, but what's your prediction about what the trusted news business model will look like in coming years, asks Mark Stoddard. Will it be a space mostly for nonprofits?
I think there will be still room for for-profit news organizations as well, particularly when covering some of the news that's less expensive to cover. Breaking news, weather, which attracts massive audiences, sports coverage, events coverage. But when it comes to supporting coverage of public policy, of local government, and then serious investigative reporting, that's going to become more and more dependent upon funding from philanthropic sources, individuals, as well as corporations through sponsorships or other donations, as well as, of course, from foundations, which can range from local small family foundations, which are among our most loyal supporters of Wisconsin Watch, to some of the major national foundations.
Is that going to lead, like, I know we need to close, but that tension for like journalistic and editorial control? I mean, if someone's sponsoring the work and they're, looking at a particular issue, yes, how are we going to balance that?
Great question. All money has a history. And unless like Dee and I were to win the lottery and we could just put that straight into Wisconsin Watch, we're going to have to pull money in from donors, individuals or corporations or foundations. So the best approach is to develop strong policies, a firewall between news coverage decisions and donors, making it crystal clear that donors have no influence over the news coverage decisions. Furthermore, in addition to that editorial independence, then also total financial transparency. We've always identified every single donor, and for any donor who's giving $5,000 or more, the exact amount is identified, as well as if there are any strings, like this money is for coverage of the environment or local schools. We just took $8,000 from the Walton Family Foundation to fund our coverage of how rural schools are dealing with the pandemic. We disclosed all that within our story, as well as on our funding page. So the answer is, yes, it's an issue, but the best approach is journalistic independence and financial transparency.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap up, but thank you for sharing a lot of really thoughtful information. And I'm going to turn this back to President Darren.
Thank you. And I want to say these are awesome questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mary. And thank you. And in honor of leaders like yourselves, Andy, Dee, and Jay, who speak to our club members, we will make a donation to the YWCA Southeast Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
A bit of club business. I hope to see all of you at our snack program on Thursday at noon with Rotarian Angie Tornes from the U.S. Parks Service. Join us for that. Next week for our Tuesday program, join us for an economic forecast with our favorite economic prognosticator, University of Wisconsin Foundation President Mike Knetter. Mike's a great presenter, so hope to see you all there. And in case you missed it at the beginning of the program, Michelle will close us with our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series featuring Rotarian Wendell Willis. Wendell, thank you for that. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. Our meeting is adjourned.
One of the big bigger ones for me was, the club taking on the Johnson's Park project in that neighborhood and working with Brown Street Academy. I think that anytime that we've talked about going into that neighborhood and doing work but not doing it, to somebody, doing it with them and their thoughts in mind and what's happening there, and trying to continue that work and bring other people and make it more inclusive to how do we, revitalize a neighborhood in Milwaukee. So, the ability to constantly be, like I referenced before, be able to pivot and change. So, I think that I'm very proud of the work that Rotary's done in this time of COVID. Right away, obviously membership was a challenge and an issue in looking at that, but simultaneously saying, where there's a challenge, there's opportunity. We're not meeting in person. We're actually saving some dollars by not paying for meals. Can we actually go and give some of that money back to the community? We might have done more, service project being physically service oriented. We've been able to make that shift. I think we've been able to make a good case that, there's still a value proposition to be had. The reality is, right, if you have put in the time and relationship to the deposits beforehand, it's been a whole lot easier to reach out to people now to say, I need that one-off conversation with you about this thing, or a cluster of us to get together in smaller groups or find an outdoor space or something where we still either move our work forward or, just meet individually to get things done. So I appreciate the ability to do that.